Who experiences a breakup more intensely, a woman or a man, and will the partner attempt to restore the relationship? In this video, I will try to break down into atoms and discuss in detail all those classic relationship scenarios that ended with a woman leaving the relationship so that it becomes understandable for everyone. A breakup is not the end. After a breakup, for a certain period, months, sometimes even years, the emotional pendulum continues to move inertially because a certain biochemical hormonal homeostasis has formed in the limbic system of the partners towards each other. The longer they were together, the more firmly it is formed, regardless of the tone on which they parted and how much negativity was accumulated. I will now unfold the classic relationship scenarios that lasted at least 3 months. In other words, the partners acquired a certain so-called emotional attachment, exchanged certain positive emotions, and formed new synapses in each other's minds. Okay, let's begin. A woman left a man because she fell out of love. What does it mean when a woman falls out of love? Just as there are certain laws in physics that derive from objective reality and based on which we construct certain theories that help us study objective reality, there is also the biochemistry of men and women and their interest in each other, which is also part of the physical cause and effect world. One such law is that a woman cannot experience the so-called love, that is, passion, from a strong position towards a man. For a woman to experience that feeling of being in love, the man must be stronger than her. And what does a strong man mean? I have a separate video on that where I have explained everything in detail. You can watch it. If a woman left a man because she fell out of love, it means the following. The man held a strong position, and after a certain time, his position weakened. He disrupted the balance of significance. There are 2 classic versions of the beginning of such a relationship that affect its duration. The first version is when the man was not entirely strong. He fit the woman's taste in certain parameters. The woman was driven by a thirst for spicy emotions, meaning she longed for romance. So she began to idealize the man to strengthen him as much as possible in her mind to experience those spicy emotions towards him. In other words, the woman placed the man on a king's throne. And yes, both sides receive many positive emotions from such a relationship for a certain period. However, such a relationship is not very long-lasting because as soon as the woman satisfies all the emotions she longed for, a new hormonal homeostasis forms in her limbic system. That is, she adapts to the new environment and the dose of emotions created by her own illusions no longer satisfies her. Therefore, the flaw that the man had, which the woman idealized at the beginning of the relationship, gradually surfaces. The woman expresses dissatisfaction more often, conflicts become more frequent, and eventually lead to separation. Or, during the process of expressing dissatisfaction and conflict, the man does not understand the entire structure, realizing that the whole relationship was simply dependent on the woman's limbic system, and he tries to resolve the causes of the conflict. However, that is simply the result. In other words, the man fights the result, which further weakens his position, and during this time, the woman gathers reasons to create new illusions and to be right with her conscience, so that when they separate, she feels justified. In reality, she is already eager to leave the man. Typically, at such times, the man is much more attached to the woman and suffers. Without going into too much detail, let's say the woman eventually leaves and breaks off the relationship. Now, there are 2 scenarios. The first, which happens most often, is that the man periodically writes to the woman, wishes her well on holidays, or does something similar, thinking it will evoke emotions in her, remind her of the romantic times they had together, and that she will run back to him. This works in the opposite way. It helps the woman to completely forget. Therefore, after such an approach, the revival of the relationship is mostly unsuccessful. Consequently, the woman feels nothing during this time. Meanwhile, the man's feelings are quite prolonged, lasting months, sometimes even years. In the second scenario, after such a type of relationship, when the woman leaves the man and the man immediately cuts off contact, does not chase after her, does not write to her, even if she writes to him or inquires, he does not respond. Essentially, he puts her in total ignore mode. This is very rare, but sooner or later, the woman will try to restore the relationship. So, after the separation, the man inevitably suffers, but he maintains a certain principle and does not write. At this moment, the woman is completely indifferent, feels nothing, but after a certain period, nostalgia begins. She inquires about the man, and if she does not receive a response, this is where the woman's emotional pendulum begins to swing, and as time passes, emotions accumulate to the point where she will inevitably try to restore the relationship. This could be 6 months later, it could be 2 years later, but she will inevitably try because she will inevitably feel it. And if the woman's emotional pendulum starts moving, it cannot be stopped. She will inevitably reach peak stress and will inevitably be unable to resist the desire to restore the relationship. The second version is when the man turns out to be genuinely stronger than the woman, meaning the woman did not need to idealize the man much and fell in love with him as he is. This type of relationship is relatively longer because for the woman to fall out of love and leave the relationship, it takes some time because the man is objectively strong to a certain degree internally, and the woman has to weaken him to make the decision to leave. Yes, many different factors influence all of this, such as external conditions and the degree of the woman's problematic nature, but I won't go into details because we're touching on another topic, and I have separate videos on that. In most cases, the man begins to concede his position when he starts to take the woman seriously and plans a future with her. This can happen before marriage, after the woman becomes pregnant, or after she has a child. This is about the internal state, not external factors, meaning the man's internal readiness. If he previously viewed the woman with suspicion, was relatively indifferent towards her, and could easily part ways, he now internally decides to be with her forever. And exactly at this moment, the woman's behaviors directed towards separation start with small things that even the woman herself doesn't realize and that seem insignificant to you and go unnoticed. For example, if earlier the man wouldn't tolerate certain minor rude behaviors from the woman and wouldn't let them slide, now he does because he thinks, well, we're already one family or will be. And there's no need to fight over small things. And so, step by step, the woman's position strengthens while the man's weakens. Naturally, in this video, we're talking about a problematic woman, as the vast majority are with various degrees of problematic nature, and none of the scenarios discussed in this video are related to a useful woman. Accordingly, after a certain period, when the woman's demands, rudeness, and inappropriate behavior gradually increase, and the already weakened man, who can no longer control the situation and is emotionally involved, makes various types of mistakes, such as yelling, arguing, sulking, judging, and so on. In short, the same scenario is activated here as in the previous scenario. The concentration of dissatisfaction and conflicts gradually increases and leads to separation from the woman's side. Now, what happens after separation? In this type of relationship, the woman's limbic system is much more attached. Even if the man made many mistakes before the separation, it doesn't matter. What matters is what the man does after the woman leaves him. It's exactly the same as in the previous scenario, with only one small correction. After this type of relationship, when the woman leaves the man, even if the man pursues her for a few months, checks on her and so on, he will disgust himself at that moment. But as soon as he lets go and completely forgets the woman, some time will pass, and the woman will inevitably become interested, even if just to see if he's still alive. And here, the next step will be decided. What scenario this will follow? You have two options. Either use the message and put the woman in total ignore, meaning don't respond, or respond and completely bury your relationship and the woman's emotions towards you. If the man responds, what happens next doesn't matter. Whether the woman puts an end to it in the correspondence or they renew the relationship, it will still end in failure. In this context, initially, the man experiences distress while the woman remains indifferent for a certain period. The man's distress depends on how weakened his position is in the relationship, and the more weakened it is, the longer he suffers. Why does this happen? Here, we must apply a law derived from the biochemical and physiological structure of men and women, which tells us that a woman can endure long-term stress without any harm to her psyche, but she cannot overcome peak stress without damage. Conversely, a man can easily overcome peak stress, but he cannot handle long-term stress, which destroys his psyche. The hormone responsible for peak stress is norepinephrine, which is almost not secreted in a woman's body. It is released in very small doses, and when it is released, the woman cannot handle it and will do whatever it pushes her towards. For example, if a child is in danger, norepinephrine is released in a woman's body in such rare moments, and she takes risks to save the child. For a man's body, norepinephrine is a common occurrence. Take exercise, for example. When a man hangs a certain weight on a bar, and after 8 or 10 repetitions, when his muscles are about to give out, he risks lifting it 2 more times. At this moment, norepinephrine is released, helping him take the risk with the possibility that his muscles might give out in an instant and the bar might fall on him. Meanwhile, a woman quickly gives up during exercise and does not reach peak stress. Now let's reverse this process. A woman can hold a child in one hand for hours while preparing food with the other hand. This is long-term stress that a woman can easily handle. A man, on the other hand, cannot hold a child in his arms for a long time, meaning he cannot handle long-term stress. However, he can overcome peak stress, such as lifting a much heavier weight, but only for a short time. Now let's convert all this into relationships and how it affects after separation. In relationships, a woman can easily endure long-term stress. The hormones have settled, she no longer has the boost, and being with that man is stressful for her because she no longer receives emotions. She endures and simultaneously keeps the man in long-term stress by expressing her dissatisfaction, which the man cannot handle, leading him to make mistakes such as resentment, judgment, shouting, and so on. The woman collects these mistakes to eventually bring him to peak stress, which he cannot overcome, and says that she did everything she could. The same principle applies after separation. Initially, the man is in long-term stress, which he cannot handle, and that's why he periodically writes to or checks on the woman, or even sends something negative. This is long-term stress that the man cannot handle. There are 2 options here. Either the man reaches peak stress and overcomes it, and if he does, he will ultimately forget the woman and never want to renew the relationship with her, or he damages his psyche, which also divides into 2 categories. He remains a much weaker man with a psychological defect, or it turns into pathology and he chases the woman. In the second scenario, when a man quickly leaves the woman, it shows that he has quickly overcome the peak stress. The woman, on the other hand, gradually transitions from indifference to long-term stress, where an internal struggle takes place within her between positive and negative thoughts about the man. When the man responds to the woman, he stops her long-term stress. However, when he does not respond and completely ignores her, all negativity about the man slowly disappears in the woman, leaving only positivity, and she enters peak stress, which she cannot handle, inevitably trying to make contact and restore the relationship. I hope I was able to convey the idea and mechanism correctly with words alone, without any visualization. Here, I am explaining the mechanism itself, the mechanism by which the vast majority of people act unconsciously. Like the video, share it, and comment so it spreads as widely as possible. Watch all the videos on the channel and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.